My name is Stephen Harwood. I am a composer by training, a sound designer by accident, and I grew up playing video games and would maybe be a better musician now if I had played fewer video games and practiced the saxophone instead. But I'm very happy to be a musician working in the video game industry, and I believe most of you were here for the keynote just prior to this, presented by my co-presenter here, Lennie Moore.
If you were sleeping in, I'm Lennie Moore, and composer as well.
And we both do some teaching.
Yeah.
We work as independent contractors, freelance, to write music for video games, but we also teach music for video games. And I've listed schools here just to give you the idea, the understanding that video game music and video game sound is being taught in a formal way. There are more and more schools every year in the US teaching video game music, and in the UK, and I believe throughout the world. I know UFU has plans for some video game classes here. So just to put that there were a couple of questions following Lennie's keynote about, do you have to go to school to do this? And the answer is not really, but it helps a lot. It can help a lot if the program is good and if you're a good student. So today, what I want to talk about, and with Lennie's going to talk as well, about the fundamentals of working with sound and music for video games. And when I talk about this with students or in lecture presentation, generally the audience does have some familiarity with producing sound for picture, right? Doing what we call post-production. Is everybody familiar with the idea of post-production? Hands up. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're adding sound effects and music to picture, whether it's a film or a TV show, right? And so when I talk about video game sound, I like to approach it from linear film or TV, right? Post-production for linear media as something that's more familiar. More people have at least some. We've all gone to the movies and we watch TV shows, right? So we've at least experienced the end result. We're familiar with the idea that the sound and the picture are connected in time, and that the music evolves with the story. Yes. So
I'm wondering, just out of curiosity, just the makeup of who's here. So how many people are composers? Okay. How many people are songwriters? They just write songs. Okay. And how many people are more sound design, sound effects? Okay. And for those that haven't raised their hand, what area is what you call your area of expertise? Computer science. How many programmers are here? Okay, great. Okay, so it's a mixture of different disciplines. Okay.
Okay, very good. Well, so the advantage, I think, of approaching video game sound from a more familiar perspective, like linear post-production, is that it allows us, as we go out from here, if we have an interest in working professionally as audio creators, sound designers, composers, whatever it is that you want to do professionally as an audio person in the video game industry, there are many, many similarities between typical traditional linear post-production and production of sound for games. And so leverage, right? Take advantage of. Yes, we want to use the experience we already have with linear post-production as an advantage when we go into this new field with the video games. And today, I think the most important part of this, of course, then is going to be where are the differences between traditional linear post-production and the development of sound effects and music and dialogue for video games. And we're not going to be able, obviously, to cover all of it in depth, but my primary goal here today is to at least expose you to some of the more important differences so that you become aware of what it is you might want to go study and learn about and prepare yourself to do. Going into the industry. So when you have an opportunity to work, when you find a job, and I think Lennie made a very good point about sometimes opportunities to work come unexpectedly. They can come as a surprise. It is to your benefit to already know and have some practice with these different techniques that aren't familiar to linear post-production but are very important to sound and music for video games. You want to already have some practice with them and some familiarity with them so that when that first opportunity comes, you know, all of a sudden, you're ready to go. You don't have to hurry off and try to figure out what is this strange thing they talk about with interactive audio or adaptive audio, or what is this strange, unfamiliar vocabulary that my computer programmer is using to talk to me about how they want to put the music into the game. You should already have some familiarity, right? Even if you haven't done it yet professionally on a job, you can practice these things going in. So who wants to come up here
volunteer.
and participate? Anybody know what this is? Yes? Do we have someone who wants to come play Space Invaders for a second?
I saw a hand up over there.
Come.
No.
Anybody?
I think she was stretching.
She was
You don't want
stretching?
to play Space Invaders? No. Yeah?
No? I've never had to work this hard before to get somebody to come up and play. Okay, I'll play. Do we have audio? No? No?
The mixer seems okay, that he's asking for the resource that your computer is
Okay, I'll just try quitting a few things.
You got multiple things triggering different sound.
Well, I mean, who knows?
Got it.
Okay, so please pay attention to the sounds that you hear. More? Good. Okay. What sounds did we hear?
bass sound.
The bass sound, right? So, yeah, so we're going to call that music, right? And what did we notice about it?
It is steady
Yeah,
and steady first.
Excellent.
Faster, going faster and faster.
right. The tempo increases
Enemies approaching.
as the enemies approach. Trust me when I tell you, because I'm not going to play again. But if you do not shoot any of the Space Invaders, it does not speed up. Right? So the music only speeds up based on whether or not you're progressing through the game. Okay? What other sounds did we hear?
Shooting sound.
The shooting sound,
That's
unfortunately, yes.
Destruction sound.
The destruction sound, and then the sound of the red flying saucer that came across the top. Did anybody notice anything unique about that sound?
That's pretty loud.
Yes, it was very loud, very loud. And maybe why do you think they would choose to make it loud?
Sort of punishments for dying.
Oh, no, it's always that loud, whether you've died or not. I think they made the decision to make that loud because if the player shoots, it's important. If the player shoots that flying saucer, they get bonus points. It's extra points. So it is especially interesting to the player. And so by making that sound louder than the other sounds, the designer, the game designer, is helping the player to accomplish their task, which in this case is to score as many points as possible. Yes.
Or maybe also your focus is on below of the screen, so maybe the designer wanted to take away
It creates a distraction.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. They're trying to direct your attention to where what is the most important thing happening at that moment, right? So let's see if.
Yeah, and I can imagine when it's going faster and faster and faster, and the stress level goes up, and that flying saucer comes by, you know, it creates even more stress.
So, actually, wasn't that sound resemble heartbeat?
Yes, yes, it's very effective choice for the music because that heartbeat has an instinctive emotional significance.
Yeah, I seem to recall, I think it was Tommy Tallarico, who's a video game composer, talking about how it's the tempo of the beginning is something like 72 beats a minute. It's the typical normal heart rate.
A resting
Yeah.
heart rate. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, so that we all stay on the same page with vocabulary for this discussion, I want to introduce the idea of dynamic sound. So, dynamic, not loud and soft, but dynamic, changing. It changes. And then two subcategories of that: interactive and adaptive. So interactive sounds are characterized by their being, they occur in response to direct player input. The player does something and the sound occurs.
Right. You shoot the aliens.
And an example would be, you know, if the player is in a game and they walk up to a door and there's a buzzer and it says, press the button, and you press the button and then the hand magically comes out and presses the button and there's a sound, right? So we're going to call that interactive sound. And then adaptive sound is characterized by sound where the changes that occur happen sort of behind the scenes. So it's sort of a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, pulling the strings and pressing the buttons, and the player has no direct conscious involvement in when, why, or how the sound will change. The game itself is responsible for changing the sound as the game is played so that the sound effects and the music remain appropriate to what is going on in the game at any given moment. Right? So we're going to call that adaptive sound. Obviously, the sound is adapting itself to what is going on in the game. And a perfect example of that would be, the music that we just heard in Space Invaders, where the shooting sound would be what? Interactive, and the music would be adaptive, right? Another example of adaptive sound that is not music would be the way that the sound of a player's footsteps change as they walk through the world of a game. If they walk on concrete and then on gravel and then on grass and then they step into a puddle, the sound of their footsteps will change, hopefully, if it's a well-done game, right? If the developer did their job, the sound of the footsteps will change. But obviously the player has not pressed any buttons or flipped any switches in order for those changes to occur. Right? So the game is adapting the sounds that it plays back to accompany the footsteps on its own. Right? It's keeping track of what's going on in the game, and it's changing the sounds that play back so that they make sense with what the player is doing. Okay, so interactive and adaptive. And to drive the point home, I'll play maybe a little bit of this. So listen again to the sounds that are you hear. Let me try again. That's very embarrassing. This is why I asked for volunteers. So slow down. It's also very unnatural to play this game on a QWERTY keyboard. Okay, so how about some examples from that, the sounds that were interactive? Opening sound? Opening, the opening of what?
The music?
Oh, the music in the beginning? So, well, that would, kind of, okay. So remember the "it depends" idea? So if the player understands that outside of this building there's no music, and then when they walk into the building where something scary is going to happen, the game starts to play back scary music, conceptually, that is adaptive music, right? Because the player is not doing anything to cause the music to play back. But then if the player starts walking in and out of the building on purpose to listen to the music or stop the music, then it kind of becomes interactive in a way.
A weird way.
So as with many things, when you attempt to put them into an academic context so that they can be discussed in a classroom or in a lecture, sometimes you create these artificial separations, and don't overthink. Just what is the original purpose? What is the intent here? With an interactive sound, we're talking about helping to fill out the sensory experience that the player has. Right? They don't actually touch anything in the game. They only ever touch the controller. In real life, no matter what I do, even if I just very subtly tap my fingers on this table,
Don't do that.
there's a little sound. I can hear a little bit of sound. Yeah. Right? So if you take sound away from the player's, I always want to use the word volitional to show off in English, but it's not going to get over here. If I do things on purpose and there is no sound that accompanies them, it's like a big hole. Something's missing. Right? So we can add sound to those interactive experiences to help give the player a more complete sensory experience while they play the game. Right? Okay, let me keep moving, because we're gonna hopefully have time for plenty of questions. So some essential similarities, things that are similar between sound for film and TV and sound for games that are very important. So the function of sound. Why do we actually put sound and music into a film? You know, what purpose does it serve? Well, we have emotional, narrative, and structural functions. Right? Emotional, it's very, very straightforward, right? We all understand the importance of, especially music, for connecting the audience with the story. The music from Space Invaders is a perfect example. As the game progresses and the Space Invaders come at you more quickly, then the music speeds up. so your emotional state is being brought along with what's going on in the game. Right? For a narrative function, have we played Red Dead Redemption? Or have we watched
Star Wars.
have we watched Star Wars? Have we watched the old spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to try to whistle, but right, that one, and the wah wah wah, and the slide, the steel guitar. So that sound tells us Wild West. So if the story is set in the Wild West setting, you know, if the narrative takes place there, then having the music and the sound design match up with that helps to tell the story. Yes? Good. And now structural functions is one that don't hear discussed a lot, but because it's subtle, and I think many decisions are made on instinct. Right? They don't really, again, you know, don't try to overthink this stuff, but it's worth pointing out. So, anybody hear anything in the Super Mario that they thought was maybe had a structural function?
Flag music?
The flag music, it tells me that I'm at the end. Yes? How about,
Whenever you get an object,
Hitting of the
you form it to achieve.
okay, how about this? When we talk about the structural functions and what their inherent, what their central value is, when we read a book, the story is divided into chapters, right? And the chapter is divided into paragraphs. And the paragraphs have sentences with a period, right? Why do we use paragraphs? Why do we use chapters? Why, when we write a play, do we break it up into 3 acts, and each act is broken up into 3 scenes? It helps the listener, it helps the audience member absorb the story. It gives the audience member, or if it's a video game, it gives the player a framework or a skeleton within which they can compartmentalize and separate the different pieces of the story. This helps them to take it in and keep track of everything that's going on, to make sense of the story. Okay? So how about a piece of adaptive audio from Super Mario? Anybody?
Ja, waar je kent bij grounds from that going to musical change.
Yes. So when we go down the pipe, the music changes, right? So that would be an example of adaptive music, right? The player pressed a button to go down the pipe, but they didn't press any button to make the music change. The music changed adaptively, so that we have daytime, happy da-da-da-da-da-da, and then when we go down the tube, now it's dark and we're underground, and we have da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da, right? It's different. It helps to separate in the mind of the audience player that they're in a different part of the game. Yes? And I also believe that it's functioning emotionally in an effective way in that case. For me, I think sounds a little bit more appropriate for being underground than especially when they're put in context, when they're put next to each other. Right? Okay, so we have these same functions that you see in film and TV, they occur in games. We use similar tools. So there's Pro Tools and recording studios and Foley pits and very talented human beings who are highly skilled at what they do. So we make use of many of the same tools to actually create the content, and we take advantage of similar stylistic traditions. And this, even in a natively English-speaking country, very few people know the word semiotic, so I always put it up here to show off. Does anybody know the word semiotic?
But I prefer you can explain.
Okay. All right. So semiotics is the study of symbols and their meaning. Right? The signifier and the signified. Right? So again, with the spaghetti western or with Red Dead Redemption, that steel guitar, that guitar, or in Halo, the synthetic sounds, right? It has a meaning. It says sci-fi, right? Or if you hear harpsichord in Assassin's Creed, it says, medieval, right? So we can take advantage of this vocabulary that our listeners, our players, as audience members of film and TV, they've already been taught what these symbols mean. And I can go into a game and I can use those same symbols to convey the same meaning. Example I always like to give are the violins from Psycho, right? So before Psycho, that sort of didn't really mean anything, but Bernard Herrmann said, that makes me feel the way that I want the listener, the audience member to feel, right? Emotional function, right? So that's what I'm going to write for this scene. And now, for all of us, since then, following that, whenever you hear you think somebody's about to get stabbed, there's a woman in the shower, you think about black and white films, and you think about Alfred Hitchcock, and maybe you think about what you're going to have for dinner because there's a kitchen knife involved. It starts to radiate very quickly. But just an example of how, if you've already been working with sound for picture, whether it's film or TV, you already have a large portion of the most important skill sets. You already have that with you. Okay? And just as with film and TV, the synchronization of the sound and the picture is very important and mission critical. Like, if we don't get these things synchronized, it doesn't matter how beautiful my music is, or how well crafted my Foley elements are, or how clever the dialogue is written. It falls apart, right? So we have to keep the sound and the picture together. And like what Lennie was talking about, because we don't have time code. Does everybody know what I mean if I reference time code? It's like if you have the movie and you can describe minutes and seconds from the beginning, we use that as a reference to put the sound effect exactly where it needs to go to accompany the picture on screen. Yeah, so that time code, right? Okay. We don't really have that in a game, for the most part. There are instances where you might have what we call a cutscene or a miniature movie that takes place in a game, and then that's straight linear post-production. But for the most part, if somebody's walking around, you don't know, are they going to step on the trap door when they're in the room in the scary house? You don't know if they will, and you certainly don't know when they would do it. And so that's where things start to get a little bit different. There's also audience expectations you have to meet. And who has done some sound design for film or TV? And have you done any weapon sounds? Gunshots? Did you get to hear the original gunshot before?
Well, location recorded some crappy sound, but yes, we had to exaggerate them.
You had to exaggerate them, exactly. Because in real life, a gun fired in the wild is relatively unexciting sonically. It's very exciting, all things, in total, because there's this shock wave that hits you. It's inaudible. It's above and below the audible range, but it hits you, right? So when you watch a gunshot in a game or on the movie screen, there's no explosion in the movie theater to generate that shock wave. We call that haptic feedback, body touch feedback. So to compensate for that, we use a bunch of tricks with layering, usually low frequency content, and maybe tweak the timbre of the sound to use the emotional doorway that sound provides into your brain to get that same sort of like, oh, I just heard an explosion. response. Yes, even, yes? Okay, good. A note about audience expectations is that sometimes it's okay to break them. And this is just for fun, a video done by a friend of mine named Jake Kaufman. If anybody's familiar with chip music, he also goes by the artist name Vert, and he's a complete badass. Oops. No audio? Do we have audio? Nothing?
My arm!
So there again, he's playing against audience expectations, yes, but he's doing it very, very well. So maybe not. I'm not going to suggest that if you try to get a job that you take a classic like Super Mario Brothers and redesign the audio in a completely different direction, unless, like Jake, you are a badass and can do it tactfully and successfully. But for what it's worth, this did get him a job at Volition. So the question before about how to pitch, sometimes the most effective pitch is unsolicited, unprepared. He did this for fun.
And probably via YouTube.
Yeah, this is on YouTube. Just express yourself. Do what you like to do it very well. Make friends who like to do what you want to do, and make a point of finding friends who do other things that are related, like the programming or the art or the production in the industry that you want to work in, and allow your talent and your expression and your friendliness to grow, and opportunities will find you. As an example of where I took advantage of that shared semiotic vocabulary, that shared vocabulary between film and TV and games. This was a cutscene from a game that I did, and I relied very heavily on the fact that I can expect my player to understand the musical and sonic gestures that I make.
Crunchy bones, sweeter than macaroons. Morning bodies full of blood. Fragrant than the morning buds. I love to eat flesh in the afternoon. What is that? Is that boss music? You dare challenge me?
Right, so nothing special there, but it works the same way it would have worked if this were a film or a TV show on its own. Right? Just the fact that it's in a game doesn't really require anything different in that sense. But here are some differences. We have functions of sound and music that really occur in games only. For example, the interactive sensory feedback. You don't have to provide that to a film audience because they don't choose when the character on screen is going to ring the door, or shoot the gun. They have no choice. They're not trying to do these things in that moment, and so they don't miss the interactivity. Right? There's also what I call inform and assist, where you're helping the player to accomplish something. That goes back to the UFO, right? The film audience, they can't lose the movie, right? Their job is not to win the movie. They're just there to observe the movie, right? So there's no opportunity for you to help them complete a task. You can help them to understand things. You can help them to enjoy the movie, but there's not a, what we call a win-lose proposition. Yes? Okay. There are also game-specific tools, which we hopefully will look at with game engines and middleware. Lennie described that briefly. So this is when it gets to be a little bit more techie, hands-on, where you really want to have some time on your own, getting to learn these things before the opportunity comes for you to do it for money. There are technical limitations that you run into. Never in a film project have you ever been told, no, I can't have that totally awesome music with the French horn in it because there's no room for the French horn. Like it just doesn't happen. But with games, you can only fit so much into any one moment. All the sounds have to be in RAM at any one moment in order for them to be played. And sometimes that RAM is very limited. And for what it's worth, even if you are an experienced veteran of linear post-production, the one style that you might not really have in your tool belt would be this 8-bit retro style that I'm not really going to talk about because I don't have it. Jake, the guy who did the Super Mario thing that we just watched, he's killing it. But it's just something to be aware of, something to be familiar with. And again, no time code, right? This is probably after the memory limitations, this lack of time code, I think, is the most characteristic challenge, difference between film and TV and games. How do we get the same sort of audiovisual synchronization, especially with music, to happen in a game when we don't know exactly when the princess is going to turn and look over her shoulder at her hero and we need to cue the harp, right? We don't know when that's going to happen. Maybe it happens in a context where we already want there to be some music playing in the background. In a movie, we know exactly how long the background music needs to play, and then we have the harp right here. So the composer can adjust for how many bars and beats and tempo for the background music so that our transition into the harp and the falling in love music is seamless and beautiful and graceful. But in a game, if you don't know whether that background music is going to play for 5 minutes or 5 seconds, it might be a little bit more challenging to put those two things together in a seamless, convincing, and comfortable way. But there are techniques, and that's, I think, what Lennie's going to show a little bit later, some of these. And one final note, there's no final mix in a game. Like, you don't get to get the mix totally right, exactly the way you want it, burn it onto a DVD, and it's always going to be that single perfect mix over and over again every time somebody watches your movie. The best you can really hope for is to get the various audio assets, files, kind of in a ballpark against each other, and then teach the game to mix itself on the fly. I'm going to blow through these because we already talked about them. I will make this point, though. Surrogate, is surrogate a familiar word? Means somebody who, okay, so surrogate, a surrogate mother is someone who carries a child for another woman, gives birth to the child, and then leaves. Right? So the surrogate mother is carrying the child in place of the woman who's then going to be that child's mother as it grows up. Okay? Here, when I talk about sound being used as a surrogate for touch, if we were playing a video game where instead of shooting people in the head, I wanted to take pictures of wild animals, and I have a rhinoceros and I need to take a picture of this rhinoceros, But I don't want to take my eyes off of it. But I'm out of film. And I know because when I walked into this position, I saw over here there's a canister of film on the ground. I need to pick it up and load it into my camera, but I can't let go of this rhinoceros because they're going to run off, and I'm not going to be able to find it. So in real life, I can kind of like reach over here and fumble around and then find my film and load the camera without ever taking my eyes off the rhinoceros. Now, who plays any first-person shooters like Halo or Call of Duty? So how do you do that?
Health.
How do you pick something up in one of those games? You walk over it, right? And if that little something is sitting on the edge of a building and you have to be careful, you can just sort of like inch over to it in little tiny steps until what you hear, and you know you've got it.
Yeah.
Yes? So even though the player is completely unable to touch anything in the game, the only thing they ever actually touch is the controller, we give them that interactive audio feedback, right, to help overcome the fact that they have no sense of touch in the game. Yes? Right? Okay, good. As an example of the inform and assist function, we'll listen to a little bit of this, and you will hear in the second half, you'll hear an attempt to warn the player that an additional challenge is about to be put in front of them. Did anybody hear the sound of pots and pans being dropped in a kitchen? So that sound occurs immediately prior to the pots and pans that actually fall on the screen and must be avoided. If the player runs into them, he takes damage. Right, so that sound of the pots and pans plays immediately before the pots and pans actually show up on the screen. And it warns the player if they're zooming around in a hurry trying to defeat the boss. It says, hey, slow down, be cautious. Pots and pans, obstacles are about to show up on the screen. You might want to get down to the bottom of the screen and wait a little bit until you see where they're going to fall. Yeah? So an example of how the sound is being used to help the player accomplish their task. A functionality of the sound that you simply there's no need for it in film or TV. But I think is a very important concept to have in mind when you approach doing sound for a video game. Right? Because it's such an essential and characteristic function of sound within the context of a video game, it's worth prioritizing and looking for opportunities to do it this way, to do this. Right? Otherwise, you're just putting film music into a video game.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to work great.
So,
Kidding.
quickly, this idea of a game engine and an audio engine. Has anybody worked in a game engine? Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, a couple?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so briefly, the game engine is sort of the head person in charge. It knows everything that's going on and is responsible for the graphics and the AI and is responsible in sort of a managerial overseeing sort of way for the audio. And it receives player input and keeps track of what's happening in the game. We call game state, like is the player winning or losing? How many hit points do they have? Have they discovered the secret sword of magenta yet or not? And then it sends commands and information about the game state to the audio engine, which then responds by playing back sounds and adjusting those sounds and updating the mix, right? And I think a very useful way to approach an understanding of the way a game engine and an audio engine work together is to look at the relationship between a sequencer and a sampler. So if you're in Pro Tools and you have an instance of contact on an instrument track, and you have MIDI data on that instrument track, so Pro Tools has all of the information about the when sound should happen. Yes? That information is, that sequence of data is sent to the sampler. The only thing the sampler has is the audio, right? But it plays it back in response to the commands that come from the sequencer. Yes? So here we have a perfect analog or metaphor for the way the game engine and the audio engine relate to one another. If you had a Pro Tools sequence is just all MIDI data, and all of the tracks were simply samplers, sampler patches with the sound effects or the music in them, and they play back in response to the MIDI data. That's a very good understanding of the way a game engine and audio engine relate to one another, okay? For what it's worth, this also makes it possible to experiment or prototype your interactive and adaptive sounds in Pro Tools or Cubase or Logic. And I think the way to understand middleware is it sits in the middle between code and content, and it allows the responsibility for decisions to be shifted to the appropriate parties. So I'm not a programmer, so I don't want to really, I shouldn't be responsible for making decisions about the code. But my programmer is not a sound designer and he's not a musician, so I don't want him to be making decisions about how to balance the instruments or which should be how loud. Right? And middleware, without getting too in-depth, is simply a tool that allows responsibility to be shifted, primarily decisions about music and sound taken off of the to-do list of a programmer and given back to the sound designer or the composer who's better prepared to make those decisions. And this allows the programmer to focus on things that he's good at, right? The two most popular middleware softwares are Fmod and Wise. I know there's two W's. You don't say the first one. It's just Wise. It's not W-Wise. It's Wise.
We're Wise.
So we're Wise. It's just Wise. Fmod and Wise. Both of these are available for free. You can download them. You can learn them. And you, as a composer, as a sound designer, you don't pay for these things. The developer pays for them. But you can certainly get access to them and learn them for free. So if you meet somebody who's developing a game and they want to use one of these tools, you can say, yes, I know how to use that. And I think I'm going to breeze over this because I'm going long. Memory is a problem. Everything you want to play has to be in RAM. RAM budgets can be very small, like on the order of 20 megabytes, even if you're talking about Halo on the Xbox. 20 megabytes is not a lot of sound. So you load only the bits and pieces that you need for that moment, and then you chuck them and use something else. You can edit things very tightly. You can downsample so that you don't chew up file space, disk space, to encode, high frequency content in a sound that doesn't have any high frequency content. We're all familiar with what's it called?
What was it?
Yes. Who was that? Thank you. Nyquist. Yeah, we're all familiar with that. Oh, is that you?
Yes.
I thought I recognized the name, but it came from over here. Exactly. And if you have an opportunity to take a periodic sound and get a small portion of it that will loop, instead of putting 5 minutes of wah, 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 wah in your game for the air conditioning system, if you can find something much smaller, we can increase variety and sonic variety in the game by taking a single sound and changing its volume or its pitch by a few percent in one direction or another. So instead of having 5 footstep sounds taking up 5 times the memory, I might just have 1 and change the way it sounds a little bit every time it plays back. And sometimes you can take a single file and use it for different sounds, right? You might have the sound of a doorbell, right? If you time stretch that so it's lowered by 4 octaves and put it through like a spooky like a ring modulator, all of a sudden now you have like this creepy ambient bed that would be appropriate maybe when Mario goes down the pipe in his actual AAA version of the game. Yeah? Okay. And MIDI and mod, on the theme of what's old is new again, MIDI and mod are very important. Anybody know what I mean when I say mod tracker? Yes. So from the Amiga, from the Commodore Amiga. So especially with the boom of the mobile development industry, and those devices have relatively small capabilities in terms of memory, being able to use MIDI and mod trackers to execute your music is actually more and more important now. It was less interesting once we had the capability to put CD quality recordings in the game. Everybody thought that was great, but it actually makes adaptive music more difficult to achieve, and it requires so much space that if you insist on having that technical quality of your audio files, you then have to compromise by putting fewer files into the game. And so now your game sounds the same for the entire 30 hours or 20 hours that you play it, and that's not very cool. It's just an example of what Mod Plug Tracker looks like. And here are the 3 ways I think about not knowing exactly when something is going to happen, a moment in time. In what order are the events going to happen in the game? Like a quick example, if there's a game and you always talk to a princess and a beggar, and when you talk to the princess, she lies to you. She tells you a lie. And when you talk to the beggar, he tells you that the princess is a liar. If you talk to the princess first, and she tells you that she loves you, and that money doesn't matter, and you have harp and beautiful music, right? And then you go and you talk to the beggar, and he's like, no, she got over on you, she was telling you a lie, that's not the truth. Then you go, oh man, that's heartbreaking music, right? What if you talk to the beggar first, and he says she's going to lie to you when you talk to her? Now, it's not necessarily heartbreaking music, but it's sort of like tension, creepy, why she got to be like that, sort of like music, right? And then when you go and talk to the princess and she tells you she loves you, we don't hear the harps and the high strings, and things don't swell, right? It's a totally different thing. So the order of events can be very important. So we don't have 2 pieces of music, now we have 4.
What if she changed her mind?
What if she's changed her mind? Right, exactly.
Change of heart.
And then obviously variable duration. If we don't know how long the player is going to be playing a certain portion of the game, either because of their skill level or because of their style of play, sometimes you can have players of equally accomplished skill level, and they just have different styles. Some people just shoot right through. They don't even bother to pick up all the goodies or kill all the enemies. They just bang through and get on to the next task. And then some people sort of like creep around and try to find all the hidden objects. And so if I want my music sound, that's great for the first guy who's just sort of like running and gunning and screwing through. But, you know, while the guy's going really slowly trying to find everything, it doesn't fit at all. So we don't have that problem with film and TV because we know exactly how long the scene is going to take. So just to make the point. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Lennie to talk about adaptive music.
Okay. Thumb drive.
Thumb drive.
We'll see if we can make
Scalpel.
Wise working on this. wonder if you can, well, it might play off the thumb drive, right?
Not gonna, this whole thing?
Yeah, that monster.
Let's see what it does.
Might be a couple of minutes. I can talk about something in the meantime.
While it's doing that,
Yes.
I have a question. Maybe you're going to answer that. But let's have this scenario. There is this first-person shooter game, and in the game there are these barrels that you shoot and they blow up.
Of course,
very loudly.
it's required.
You know, it's required. And then we have this guy with an ADD. All he wants to do is blow up the barrels. I mean, there's many of them possible in the same time, you know, simultaneously. Of course, I'm thinking sound is clipping, blowing over you, and how do you deal with that?
So that's a perfect example of where we're talking about teaching the game to mix itself. While this is copying over, I can skip ahead to an example I show of adaptive mixing with Dead Space, actually. We'll listen to the game with music and sound. And now the game with only the music. And if you're interested in this stuff, I encourage you to find menus in your game where you can turn off the sound effects and dialogue and listen only to the music, or vice versa. So here is with only the music. Do you hear it ducking?
It's like, yeah.
It's
like
ducking.
Hard limiters on the.
It's like I said, it's the same tools, it's the same techniques that we would use for film or TV post, except instead of drawing an automation curve in Pro Tools, we teach the game how to execute
In
a
real time.
ducking maneuver.
Yeah.
Tell it when we would like, under what conditions we want it to do that, and then send it out into the world for it to have fun.
Yeah. And sometimes it works great, and
Yeah,
sometimes not so great.
But do you have game testers who does exactly these things before
Oh, sure.
things are released?
Yeah.
You know?
Hopefully, sometimes you don't, and having an opportunity to work with middleware where you can actually hook it up to the game and tweak things while playing provides an advantage there, because then your developer doesn't have to spend money on somebody to test the decisions that you're making. Right? That makes sense. Okay.
Cool.
Let's see
Think
if
you're
we're finished.
Pretty close there.
Very good. All right. So, come on, baby girl. Oops. Go away. Go away. Go away. Go away, you. Go on. Go on. Let me do this. And that. Get out of here.
Right there. Just looking for the folder, right? Mm-hmm. All right. Migrating. So if there's another question, Lance.
Oh, do we have another question? Yes.
Is there any like direct communication between sound designer and the composer in the music industry?
Is there any direct communication?
Communication in the production process, because like in the film industry, it's always kind of a problem. You know, you always get the project when it's actually one person is done with their part, but we can hear actually it's really important to I think you know designing the sounds based on what is going on in the music. So it's more like hyper-real sound. That's particular.
Yes. So the question is, do the sound designer and the composer get to communicate with one another and compare notes and talk about, I'm doing this, can you do that, and how can we complement one another instead of stepping on each other's toes?
Like, yeah, meeting in the studio and showing their ideas, or is it like in the professional industry it doesn't happen?
I would say on the majority, it doesn't happen, but a good audio director will make a point of balancing the sound design and the music. They may not give the sound designer or the sound design team and the composer or the composing team an opportunity to communicate with one another directly, because that might actually become inefficient and sort of make things slow down. And production, of course, is always about hitting the deadline for the publisher. But a good audio director should be able to make those decisions about this is what the sound design is doing, this is what the music is doing, and if it looks like they're about to run into each other and cause a problem, then he should be able to change directions by speaking directly to the sound design team or directly to the composer about how to correct their course so that we get back into harmony and working together instead of working against each other. Yeah?
So, let's see. I'm going to try playing something, and I show meters here.
Oh, let me try this. I don't know why my start menu is not happening. Where is the settings?
Preferences, project settings or preferences.
Oh yeah, probably remind me where they choose the audio card.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so just to give you a couple of ideas of like nonlinear kinds of approaches. So for those of you that are audio folks that have seen Pro Tools, so here's an example of this is Wise, and so when you load stuff in, you can just sort of drag audio files into this, and the structure that Wise uses to organize everything is sort of what's called a parent-child structure. And so, for instance, you start with an audio file, and then so that's in like what I call a child folder. It says, okay, here's your audio file, and then you can give it rules like I want this audio file to start at a particular point, and then loop. And then I set a loop start point and end point. So like here, if you look at the bottom of the screen here on the right, you got a little green marker, a little red marker, and it's it says entry queue and exit queue, and that's like a loop start, loop end kind of a marker, and you can do things within here. Let's see, let me slide this over a little bit so you can kind of see. What's going on over here. So basically, whenever the way Wise works, whenever I double click on the left side, it shows me more detail on the right. So if I'm looking at the general settings, you can actually set volumes for each individual component. So instead of a programmer at the game developer trying, if something's too loud, like a machine gun noise or overall ambience or anything like that, you can as a sound person go in and just specifically tweak every sound in the entire project to whatever your preferred starting point level is. And then you can make adjustments on the fly based on how you tell it to set up rules. So one of the things you can do, you can set up, positioning. You can also set up, let's see, what other goodies are in here. On looping, you can actually set up tempos and stuff like that. So like as an example, where is I kind of flip to a different project here. Loop, okay. So here's an example. I have a playlist here, and I have a tempo specifically of 4/4 time and 122 beats a minute. And when I go to the loop level, you can actually do things like, let's say you have a general tempo for a level of music, but you might have different tempos for different kinds of intensity of action. So you can actually override whatever the initial tempo is and give different tempos. You can control a lot of stuff in here. So this is 2 loops. I'm going to flip over a little bit so I can. All right, so basically this is a real-time strategy game. This is from War of the Ring. And I have, basically, in real-time strategy, you're doing one of 2 things. You're building up resources, making armies or whatever, or you're in a battle and depleting your resources. So as a very simple example of an interactive kind of a music system, all this does is it crossfades between the building music to the battle music. And the music that I wrote, it's tempo mapped and structurally mapped. And what I mean by mapped is I wrote a composition, and then I sort of did 2 versions of it. One was a lighter, lighter orchestrated version, and one was more of a heavy battle version. So I'll play the individual elements so you can hear them. So if I just play, this is sort of the lighter building version. That gives you one idea. And then if I do the battle version, let's see, where is it? RTPCs. So I'm just going to adjust it. So the battle version, same composition, just a completely different treatment with a few extra goodies. Yeah, so these are 2 separate audio stems. There's 2 separate layers.
How does it respond to the?
Okay, so to take it a step further, so each of these are 2 audio tracks basically, and then I set them up to loop. And then, so if I double click on the build, I have it set up. There's a thing called, the short acronym is RTPC, Real-Time Parameter Control. And the parameter is basically, I'm saying I choose a game state, so building or battle. So it's like a 0 and a 1 for programming purposes, right? A 1 being a battle, a 0 being a build state. And, or you could give it a number like 0 to 100. And 100 is full battle, 0 is building. And what you can do is you could set a little timer and a curve so that what will happen is I got a little fader down here as a controller, and it'll basically adjust what happens. So I can set rules here. So the build cue basically plays at full volume or normal volume when the value is 0. When I adjust my values to like 100, which is the full battle, what ends up happening is the building cue fades slowly out and then accelerates to nothing by the full 100 value. When I look at my battle loop, got a slightly different curve. So it kind of goes from absolutely nothing and has a different kind of curve, and then you don't really hear it more until it gets closer to the full 100. And when I play the track, let's see, you're going to see, so this is just the building, the value is 0. And then I just do a little fade. And you can create, depending on, in your programming, you can just time how fast it's going to go from 0 to 100. Once the game state changes from building to battle. I can do this all day.
So an important point to make here is that from the programmer side, after some basic housekeeping that we refer to as integration, which would allow the Wise and the game engine to speak to one another the same way that Pro Tools and Contact both speak MIDI. So once you teach the audio engine and the game engine to speak to one another, which you call integration, then these sorts of decisions about implementation, sort of putting your creative vision into the game, bringing it to life, all the programmer and Lennie really need to agree upon is a name to call the event that plays the music,
what's the command gonna
and
be?
the name to use for this RTPC value.
Right. And what the value is, the actual value, because you might have a programmer go, just give me 0 to 100.
Right.
So that when they program everything, they can say, okay, anytime we're going building to battle, it'll just be this 0 to 100 curve, and then, I'll set it for a half-second crossfade.
And once that's in place, then Lennie, here's a slang term, go to town.
Oh, yeah.
He can do whatever he wants,
Yeah.
as long as he doesn't violate the contractual agreement, so to speak, about what is the name of this thing and how do we spell it and what are its values available. Lennie can make this as complicated as he wants.
Right. One thing I want to add to this, how many people, the programmers probably know this more than anybody, how many know the phrase break the build? And there's a very sad look on your face, too. Okay, so what break the build means is if you're the sound person and the programmer says, okay, for the battle cue, like notice how I've got these named a particular way. And upper and lower case is really important. So, Honorian is the region, underscore good, underscore capital letters loop, underscore battle. And then the other is underscore build. Let's say I misname the file. And it's instead of battle, there's no E at the end of it. All right. The programmer is going to say, we're in the Honorian area, so we're going to play this Honorian music in these 2 files. So it's going to tell the programming, these are the 2 files. And if I misname something, what ends up happening is when they play the game and the programming and it gets to this Honorian section, all of a sudden whenever you go to the battle music, nothing plays because you misnamed something, you've broken the build. Now the game is broken and it's not working properly. And that's sort of a simple break that can be solved by somebody going, oh, you named it wrong. But what ends up happening with programming a lot of times is you have to compile the program into a version that you send to the publisher for their approval. And in some game development, when you've got a big project with 100 employees and everyone's working hard to meet the deadline and you've got everything done and then they compile the code and then they send it to the publisher and the game doesn't work. And the game developer is relying on the $5 million payment from the publisher for sending them a working build. They don't get their money, nobody gets paid. And everybody in that game development company hates you because you broke the build and now they have to figure out, okay, what broke and where is it out of these 20,000 lines of code or 300,000 lines of code, where is it broken and how do we fix it and when are we getting paid and all that kind of stuff. So never ever break the build.
And don't forget smoke tests.
And don't forget the smog. What is it?
Smoke test.
Smoke test, I'm not familiar with that phrase. What's a smoke test?
Well, it's basically after each build, you test basic functionality. Like for Pro Tools, we used to do that at digital design. With every new build, there's a smoke test.
Smoke, is that like a stress test?
No.
Okay.
You just make sure that you didn't break the build.
Okay. Okay, so I got it.
To use functionality.
Oh, I got it. So you just kind of test through everything and make sure that everything's working. Yeah. So this is one simple example. Can I go for the complex?
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm going to go for a more complex example. And I got a couple of different things. I got my 70s, thing here. So let's go to DHX. Okay. All right, so this is a more complicated structure. This is, all right, so I'm going to zoom in on this. So basically what this is, it's a loop, and then there's also, let's say it's a loop is some sort of an activity, and then there's a win or a lose. All right, so the win is really simple. It's just a one-shot piece of stereo audio. Here's a lose. All right, and then the loop, this isn't just one piece of audio. So this is a composition. All right, and what I did was I exported out separately just the drum part. Just the bass part, just a flute, a guitar, horns, all that kind of stuff. Little 80s disco. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play, and then I have switching mechanisms added. There's all sorts of complicated kinds of rules that I've set up where I can switch between different things. So when I go, let's see, I'm on my trigger game states. Here we go. All right, so let's see, I'm on in-game action, action begin. All right, so I've got it set up where I can hit a begin, play the music track, the looping track, win, lose. Every time I select one of these, it's changing a game state the way it would be in a real game example. And so it'll go, I think it's either on the bar or on the beat. I think it's on the bar. It'll go to the win or the lose. But the other thing that happens is as I'm playing the loop, let's see, where are my toys? There we are. Need to get it so you can see it. Okay. So all those separate things, like just the bass part or just the drums, I've got it split into different game, I've sort of split into game states. So, and I'm using the same real-time parameter control, but in this case, like I've got the string parts just on one channel. And so let's say the game state, it starts off with just a very simple bass groove kind of a thing. And then if I want to increase intensity, that's intensity number 1, 2, and 3. And what I'll do is I'll give you an example by just starting to play the track and having everything set for 0. And then you can kind of hear what elements I've split up. So this is taking a very simple, almost like a pop arrangement format. And all right, so states, action begin, and then real-time parameter control, so I would play it. All right, so the intro was a full stereo thing, but now I'm just down to just the bass part. So that's with everything turned off, right? And now on the first intensity layer, all I did was add little Fender Rhodes. And it's playing through the whole arrangement of the song as it's doing this, and it'll do this all day. If I want to add a second intensity layer, got my funk guitar, got a little percussion, that kind of stuff. So a very simple way of sort of organizing everything. But in the gameplay, if you're playing a game and let's say you're just exploring, just kind of wandering around a room, increase the intensity. This is all live players. All right, and then for the third level of intensity is when we really get into something interesting that happens in the game. And get our drum beat. All right, but then let's say you want to take it up a notch. I have my horn section stuff on a completely different track. I want to take it up even further. Pull the horns out. Let's say I've got a separate extra track just to add a solo part, kind of create a little more variation. And then, the thing that's beautiful about separating all these elements out this way took out the guitar, took out the Rhodes. This is drum, bass, soloist, and some strings.
So you have a single unified piece of music that can be rearranged on the fly to provide variety seamlessly, regardless of how long the player is playing the game. Does it take them 2 minutes or 4 minutes to progress from one part of the game to the next part of the game? So this is, we'll refer to this in the business as using layered loops, and it's a very effective technique for overcoming some of these challenges that we face, where we don't know, when do we want the horns to happen, or how long is the player going to be in this area.
Yeah.
This compositional technique allows us to overcome the lack of time code.
Yeah. Now here's the other thing. This is a 2-minute composition, and when I recorded it, I actually recorded the whole band playing twice through. So they played for 4 minutes. And what I told like the drummer and the bass player was, just go to town second time through and just, loosen up and jam and all that kind of stuff. So when I actually go to the loops, okay, so like here's an example. I've got everything marked A1, A2. So A1 was the first time they played it, and if I play it, if you listen to the way the bass player plays, or the drummer. So that's an A section, right? And then if I go to the A2 section and play it, bass player's playing a little more actively, drums playing a little tighter groove, So just by having them play in real time in the recording session, playing through it twice, I get a lot more variety, a lot more adaptability. It keeps it more interesting if you're listening to it for a long period of time. So this 2-minute composition, you could play that same level for 20 or 30 minutes, and with all of the separation of all these layers, create a lot more very dynamic kind of a music background, and you won't get tired of it. And that's the biggest problem that you face as somebody who's doing any sort of audio for games, is not boring the player and making them, like Candy Crush Saga is a perfect example of this. I've had so many people go, it's a really fun game, but after about the first 30 seconds, I turned off all the sound, just because it's just
And it's so edgy. It's so edgy. Just like, how about a low pass, please? It's like, tasty. Stop.
Yeah.
Stop. All right. So thank you, Lennie.
Yep.
I think we're scheduled to wrap up now-ish, but we started late-ish. So let's just. You want to do this?
I'm just stretching.
Oh, you're stretching. All right. Let's do this. I miss my baby. Let's take questions. Questions. Yes.
I want to ask, in which stage you asked for the game developer to help the music or sound design? When the game developer finished the game completely and he called you, or when the process will begin
Okay.
and you see the whole process from the beginning?
Okay.
We should talk about vertical slice.
Exactly. So the question is, at what point in the process of making the game does the composer become involved? And it depends.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. Yeah, it depends on the project, but a lot of times the first thing to ask is, like if you're a sound designer or a composer, is to ask the client, how long have you been working on the game so far? And they may say, we've been at it for a year, and we expect to ship it in another year. Right, so then you're coming in about the halfway point, right? A lot of times I get called in closer. I usually get called in about a year before the game goes out. So because you have to also keep in mind, there's the building of the game, right? Figuring out what they're going to do creatively, aesthetically, getting everybody working on all the individual elements. And then there's also, let me think, what else? Beta testing. So, that's usually at least several months before the game actually ships. They do a bunch of testing to make sure, nothing's broken, and make sure everything's running well and everything's doing what it's supposed to do. Sometimes it's just asking the client, like, what's going on. I've been on some games, like when we did, Connect Disneyland Adventure on that game, we wrote the music. It was crazy. It was 4 hours of music, 6 composers. We had about 4 to 6 weeks to write everything. So 2 operas worth of music in 4 to 6 weeks. Record it, master it, deliver it, and I think when we delivered the final music, it was 2 weeks later the game shipped, which is insane. And we were just really lucky because the game was not broken after 2 weeks, getting the audio and stuff like that. And a lot of that had to do with the level of talent involved, the people who were the audio implementation team. Everybody was knowing that it was a really tight schedule. So everyone was thinking ahead, what can we do to make things go smoothly when we actually have the final assets? So that's probably the worst schedule was something that tight. But if you're really lucky, you get in right at the very beginning when you're trying to design the game. What do we want to do? And then as far as when you deliver the music, sometimes it's just like, okay, we're a year ahead. We'd like to give you 2 months or 3 months to do the music and deliver by a particular date. Right? And then there'd be 9 months to get it in the game and test everything and all that. So it's just discussing the client's scheduling. But I've been on some games where they have what's called a vertical slice. And a vertical slice means, and a lot of this has to do with, sometimes it's about money and commitment from the game publisher. So the game publisher says, we want you to develop a game, but we want a vertical slice of the one level of the game. So let's say the game has 10 levels. And what they mean by a vertical slice is everything is finished for that one level, completed all the way to the end, or mostly completed all the way to the end. So all the music, the sound design, all the programming, all of the art assets, the character models, the textural stuff, everything complete. So that the publisher can see basically what's close to a finished version of what the game could be, even though they haven't done the other 9 levels. And that's called a vertical slice. And there's times when they want us to actually go to the recording studio and record the full orchestra to do just music for that one level, and then make sure everything's looking really great. And then the publisher goes, yeah, that's great. We're not going to adjust anything. That's exactly what we want. Keep going. Get us 3 more levels by 2 months from now, and then we want to be at level 7 of 9 4 months from now, and then 6 months from now we want to have everything complete and have 3 months of beta testing. So that gives you an idea of sort of the scheduling that goes on.
Good answer to your question? Yes? Okay, good. Another question, please?
What do you prefer, virtual instruments or real players?
What do you do? What do I prefer, or what do I do? What do I prefer? Do I prefer virtual instruments or real players? Obviously, real players can and should sound better and feel better. Sometimes it can be problematic to implement live recordings. If you are setting up a looping situation, to get players who can play with a click and keep that groove very solid and steady is very important, especially if the loops themselves are relatively short. If you have a small variation in tempo over a minute or 2 minutes, which is natural, that's okay. But even just one tick on the metronome, if you're talking about an 8 or a 16 bar loop, when that comes back around to the original tempo, and you're really going to notice that deviation.
Yeah, it feels funny.
It feels funny. So there can be some sort of unexpected, surprising, additional difficulties that come with using live performers. So you think, oh, this is great. I have a budget and I have live performers and I'm going to get a live recording, and that's great. And then you finish the session, you go back to your studio and you start trying to chop it up and do the implementation. You're like, oh my God, I can't use this. The answer is it depends, but the real answer is I prefer to use live musicians in an ideal scenario where there are no difficulties with actually putting that musically superior performance into the game.
And the things I would add to that would be part of what's different from like for film versus the video game is this side of doing something that's interactive and adaptive. So let's say, for an example, I have a piece of music where I'm going to use the percussion section to create more intensity, and I want to have that recorded separately. So one possibility is to record an orchestra without percussion and have some isolation between that and then a separate recording session with live percussion. But sometimes, you may have budget problems too, or even performance problems. So like, as an example, between live versus samples, I've done projects where we didn't have a huge budget, so we decided, well,
things with them because they don't know what I'm talking about, So you kind of mix up based on whatever the project needs.
Orchestra, which is cheaper than recording in London.
That's it.
Like Bratislava, Slovakia, or something like that.
How do you manage the copyright of adaptive music?
It's pretty. And when you play a timpani in the concert hall with the orchestra,
it's never really an issue for me. I mean, there's certain protections that you get. Like normally with video games, it's a software business model. So it's a company that's making software. So it's not like a movie. If you write music for a movie, there's what's called broadcast royalties that you get. You write the composition, and the copyright belongs to the movie production studio, but you retain rights to receive compensation if it gets broadcast on the radio or on television around the world. In video games, it's not a broadcast medium. It's played on a computer of some sort, and so it's a software thing. So the copyright is owned by the production company, which would be the game publisher. They're the financier of all this. But what I do with my contracts with my agent is I always maintain the right to receive those broadcast royalties. Because sometimes you'll see, let's say they make a movie and they show the game. Some kid is playing the game in the movie, so they're broadcasting that audio from the game in the movie on like cable television or something like that, and that way I'm going to see some extra money, and the game publisher will get some extra money. It doesn't cost them anything, So in negotiating those rights, I don't worry about it. I just have my agent handle it, or whoever your business manager is. They just handle that stuff, and with contractual stuff, it's always about what is untouchable for you as far as your rights. If somebody wants to hire you and they like your unique gifts, then you just say what you want. It's like, this is the way I always do business. And then they go, okay, we can't afford that, so we'll go with somebody else. Or they'll go, okay, well, we can do that. And how good of a business agent you have or a business manager in negotiating those things is really, sort of the answer. It's just think about what you're willing to hold on to, what you're willing to not be so concerned about, and you just sort of pick and choose what's really important. But for the most part, the general thing in games is the copyright is owned by the person paying for the project, which in the video game world would be the publisher. And just like there's a movie studio paying for it in the movie world, and then all the other rights, like there's ancillary rights I always ask for, which is like the ability to release a soundtrack if the publisher is not interested in doing that. And a lot of times I don't get that, but I've had a couple of projects where they're like, yeah, so you kind of pick and choose whatever works for you. But in general, the copyright is whoever's originally financing the whole project.
And if your question pertains to the fact that with a piece of adaptive music, there's not one unique version of that composition, I don't know that it's actually come up yet in court.
Think it has.
Yeah. So that is,
who owns the copyright?
The programmer? That's still an unanswered question. How do you copyright a piece of music that never exists in a unique, reliable version that is right? The old standard is you send the lead sheet, or you record it onto a cassette and you put that in an envelope and get it stamped at the post office and send it to ASCAP, and that's your copyright, right? And you wrote that piece of music and you can prove that it's yours. I don't think that it's come up in a legal case yet. It's untested. Yeah, so I think that if you were asking about that, I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately.
But to me, to me, the thing that's positive about that is that it's the same as an installation piece in a museum. If you've got an adaptive audio, interactive kind of a thing in a museum where when you walk towards a particular podium, certain audio plays, the whole entity is something that is a copyrightable idea, as long as what you include in that information is that it is the combination of all those elements and the randomness or the controlled way that those elements could be presented in its entirety is the work. Then you can consider that a thing. And in video games, I think there's a way of phrasing it that way where it becomes a copyrightable idea.
Okay, so I think we're over by the same amount of time we were late. So before we get out of here, I want to, I can just drag and drop these things so that I know what order they're in. So Lennie and I are both members of an organization called the Interactive Audio Special Interest Group. It's a project within the MIDI Manufacturers Association, and it has its primary interest in interactive audio. I think what I would say is I encourage you to visit IASIG.org, IASIG.org, and have a look around, see what we're about. It's a pay-to-work organization, but it's cheap, and the work is obviously voluntary. But it's an opportunity to get your hands dirty if you're into this sort of stuff. Recently, we've been doing a lot of work with education, developing curriculum guidelines for the study and the teaching of interactive audio, game audio. There's a wiki there that is really, I think, the first best place to begin branching out. Like if you were to study, I was trying to learn a little bit about the history of Turkey, and so I started Wikipedia, and then I go from there, right? Wikipedia is not going to give me everything that I need, but it's a good place to start from. So I think the IASIG.org, the wiki that's there, is an excellent place to start.
Yeah. It's also, it's how we met,
Oh, yeah. Ufuk is also a member.
Yes.
Yes, your beloved leader. And captain and general is a member. And as are the authors of these books. Karen Collins is author of a few books. This is one that I strongly recommend also as a place to start, Game Sound. And then the Game Audio Tutorial by Richard Stevens. Between these two, and the IASIG wiki and our emails, which I forgot to put onto a slide, but I'm sure you can ask us questions, and your beloved leader, you've got a lot of material to chew on, and it will send you in the right direction.
Yeah. The other thing that's nice about IASIG is, it's once you've joined, you're definitely on an email list where somebody will pose a question to everybody. I'm thinking of talking about a particular subject, so it's a way of sharing ideas that's really great, and then also you can pose a question to everybody. So it's a way of communicating with people around the world that are passionate about game audio.
Mm-hmm. And passionate in a way where it's identifying problems that we share and then coordinating an attempt to find a solution that we can share. Like IASIG was responsible for the downloadable sound specification, which allowed you to bundle your wavetables and deliver it with your MIDI file, so that even though, while general MIDI had ensured that instrument number 7 was always the slap bass,
right?
You didn't necessarily know whether they were using a Roland or an EMU or what card they were using, so you didn't know exactly what that slap bass was going to sound like. IASIG developed the DLS specification to define a file format where the composer could then take their wavetable, ship it with the MIDI file with the rest of the game, and then they could know reliably what the music was going to sound like when it played back. They also specified I3D L1 or I3D L2, which was a set of technical facility or specifications that an audio card had to be able to execute or provide at runtime for realizing 3D audio, just so that the consumer could then say, oh, well, I want to upgrade my audio card because I play games and I want to hear fantastic immersive 3D environments. They can go and they can say, oh, look, this product here is compatible with IASIG's i3DL2 format. That's great. I understand that that's a good thing, so I feel confident buying this audio card knowing that it's going to provide a good immersive 3D audio experience for me. Just examples of the sort of interest that IASIG really was born out of, and now we've added education to that mix.
Great. Thank you guys for coming and attending, and we'll be seeing you a little later in the next day or so.
Yeah. Thank you.